In October of 2021, the NPR show Here and Now featured the Canadian rapper Shad. The feature began when Canadian rapper Shad began producing his latest album. He thought about a skit where Chris Rock pokes fun at the idea of Black excellence. I shared a joke from that skit as the interlude this morning. The Here and Now feature noted that Rock's joke was the jumping off point for Shad's latest work, which interrogates the idea of Black excellence. Shad basically says, Black people should be allowed to be just average. Black averageness, one of the singles off his latest album, Cow, talks about the pressure of expectations. In his personal life, Shad has said he'd be happy if his daughter were average. It's what his parents wanted for him when they moved from East Africa to Canada. He pushes against the notion that being average carries a negative connotation because at its core, Shad believes, the choice to be average coincides with the freedom to be fully yourself. What I was taught was that average means that practically speaking, you can do anything, he says. While there are limits to that, not everyone will walk on the moon or win an Olympic medal. It's about offering what you can uniquely contribute to the world. I think the message there is, yes, liberation to be who you are trying things, to fail. And I think also liberation from this obsession in our society with achievement. But there is a price to pay for being African American and failing, or even just not excelling. Isabel Wilkerson, in her book Caste, writes, when you are raised middle class and born to a subordinate caste in general, and African American in particular, you are keenly aware of the burden you carry, and you know that working twice as hard is a given. But more important, you know there will be no latitude for a misstep. So you must try to be virtually perfect at all times, merely to tread water. You live with the double standard, even though you don't like it. You know growing up that you can't get away with things that your white friends might skate by with. Adolescent pranks, shoplifting on a dare, cursing out a teacher. You knew better, even if you were so inclined. Perhaps having parents who came from East Africa has spared the rapper Shad from some of the fullest brunt of the racism of North America. When I served the Unitarian Universalist congregation in New Bern, North Carolina, a native-born African-American wife insisted that her husband, a now African-American who immigrated here from French Guinea, back when it was French Guinea, did not understand racism like she did. Unfortunately, life here tends to teach lessons in racism that one probably did not necessarily want to learn. I'm a bit of an NPR junkie, so another Saturday I was listening to This American Life. There was a section about Jerry Craft and Katy, Texas. Craft wrote a graphic novel about a 12-year-old Black kid who goes to a new school. He says that when he was growing up, there were two sections of books at the library, general books and the Black books. And the Black books were all history and misery. He wanted to write the book that he wanted as a kid, a book where the biggest decision the protagonist has to make is whether to play Xbox or PlayStation. If you will, a little Black averageness. He did include experiences of daily racial slights in the book, being called by the only other Black kid's name, having people touch his hair, but his character finds these confusing and annoying, not tragic. Still, when Kraft was invited to give an author talk in Katy, Texas, a white mom, Bonnie Anderson, got up a petition that garnered more than 400 signatures to stop the event and ban the book. She claimed the book taught critical race theory. She said she couldn't believe many of the events in the book could happen, even though most of them were based on things that had happened to Kraft when his parents had sent him to a private school. Anderson claimed that Kraft's book would poison the minds of her children and make them feel bad for being white. Strangely, in a life imitating art sense, one of the biggest things that happens in the book is that the protagonist loses his sketchbook in which he has recorded some of the racial slights that have happened to him. His white teacher finds it and confronts him. She tells him he is angry and ungrateful. He should be glad for the opportunity to be at the school. The protagonist learns that while he may experience racism, it is not okay to let white people know it. The teacher's reaction is all too common. When white folks are confronted with examples of racism, too often the reaction is anger or tears or denial. What Robin DiAngelo calls white fragility. One of the reasons she encourages white affinity groups for discussions of racism is so that people of color don't need to be further harmed by witnessing how we white folks react. Katy, Texas eventually put Kraft's book back on the shelf and rescheduled the author's visit, but parents gathered at the next school board meeting to protest that decision. As of 2022, 8 states had recently restricted teaching about race. 20 more states had legislation in the pipeline. The legislation worries that white children might feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish if racism is discussed. Interesting, it doesn't really say what Black children may feel. Unless you think that Unitarian Universalists are above this, let me share that I have been to anti-racism workshops in which a white reaction to a sharing of an incident of racism by a Black person was to cry and be upset and say that the hurt the Black person expressed wasn't the intention. And of course, the intention isn't the point. As I just said, the writer Robin DiAngelo calls this white fragility. Any hurt to Black people is subjugated to the hurt feelings of white folk. Back when I served a Unitarian Universalist congregation in Columbia, Maryland, an African-American member there said that he thought Unitarian Universalism needed Black congregations. Mark Morrison Reed, in his book, Black Pioneers in a White Denomination, about Unitarians and Universalists, shared how many Black ministers over the course of a couple hundred years tried to start such congregations, but were not supported. There is more than one reason why Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. One of them is that there aren't that many places where people of color get to be fully themselves. My daughter reported that my now 15-year-old grandson, when he was about 10, came home from school one day and told her he knew how to be Black and he knew how to be dark white. He didn't know the word code switching, but he already knew how to do it and that he needed to do it. It was a necessary life skill. Most work and cultural spaces require people of color to walk around being dark white. A Black church or a Native church or a Latinx church may be one of the few places people get to be fully themselves, to be average. That is why it is so important that we as Unitarian Universalists now have spaces like BLUE, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalists, and DRUM, Diverse and Revolutionary UU Multicultural Ministries. These are spaces within our denomination where people can be fully themselves. They can be the rapper Shad's Black average. Back in 1903, and please remember the date as I read the quote, W.E.B. Du Bois ended his essay, The Talented Tenth, by writing, "The talented tenth of the Negro race must be made leaders of thought and missionaries of culture among their people. No others can do this work, and Negro colleges must train men for it. The Negro race, like all other races, is going to be saved by its exceptional men." 120 years later, people are getting tired of being told by their grandparents and parents that they need to be the exceptional ones who are going to save the race. But the Black dentist is still not as likely to live in Chris Rock's neighborhood as the white one. And Black children of this generation are still, as in Isabel Wilkerson's, not as likely to get away with the things their white peers do. And a Black child in a private school today is no less likely to be confused and frustrated by racial slights than Jerry Craft was as a child. Dr. King said, "Shallow understanding by people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding by people of ill will." We are the white people, we hope, of goodwill in the work and educational and cultural spaces where people of color are feeling they need to be dark white. We can work on changing the ways we relate to make that less and less necessary. We can do that in several ways. We can show up when and where we are wanted, such as at a Martin Luther King Day march or at a Black Lives Matter demonstration. Just remember, we are not in the lead in those spaces. We can also read books, go to anti-racism seminars, and do our own work of finding the racism within ourselves. And we have all been taught it. We may not recognize it, but it's in there somewhere. The culture is a good teacher. As our 20th century Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams said, the essential meaning of human life is the struggle to shape and reshape a just and compassionate community. A just and compassionate community. A beloved community. The proposed Unitarian Universalist 8th principle that has now been folded into the new Article 2 proposal says, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Or as the proposed Article 2 redraft puts it, systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace those barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons who share our values. We commit to structuring congregational and associational life in ways that empower and enhance everyone's participation. You will note that the first places we need to work on are ourselves and our institutions. For too long, white folks have played the role of white savior, not looking at how we ourselves were inflicting harm. One of the heroes of my childhood was Albert Schweitzer. Then as an adult, I learned that he refused to train Africans as doctors and nurses to work at the clinic he had set up, always importing European workers. We need to examine ourselves and confront our own prejudices and areas of ignorance if we are truly to commit to being anti-racist people and organizations. Not racist, anti-racist. It is all too easy for white folk to ignore racism or to pretend we are past all that. But our congregations are making commitments to anti-racism, to dismantling racism. That is what signing on to the 8th principle means. It is what Dr. King called all of us to do. To use his words, now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. Shall we say the odds are too great? Shall we say the struggle is too hard? Will our message be that the forces of American life militate against the arrival of all as full persons, and we send our deepest regrets? Or will there be another message of longing, of hope, of solidarity with their yearnings, of commitment to their cause, whatever the cost? The choice is ours, and though we might prefer it otherwise, we must choose in this critical moment of human history. Let us choose, not simply not to be racist, but to be anti-racist, deeply committed to creating the beloved community that fully includes all people. Ashe. Amen. Blessed be.